becoming a father, and in those first 5 years with the lack of clear resources and support. I think what's most pervasive in all of this is the loneliness.
How mental health impacts a father during those critical times of being a new dad.
Basics is that there's a lack of sleep at home, a lack of outlets to deal with stress, looking after the baby and the family, and also dealing with difficult or stressful times at work. It's the most vulnerable time, I think, for men to experience depressive symptoms and anxiety.
And what are some of the natural consequences if they don't do the work?
Not paying attention to that is a missed opportunity for some self-growth.
A lot of fathers are doing everything they're supposed to do, working, providing, showing up, and still feeling off, tired, disconnected, wondering if this is just a part of the deal or a sign something needs attention. I'm a father too, and I know how quietly this can creep in. Today's conversation is with Andrew Howlett, assistant professor in child and youth mental health at the University of Toronto and founder of Father's Health. He spent over a decade studying and supporting fathers' mental health, not as a weakness, but as a cornerstone of healthy families. If you've ever questioned how you're really doing, this conversation matters. Drew, how are you doing today?
Hi, Dwayne. I'm doing well, thanks. I'm delighted to be here with you.
I'm really delighted to be here with you. Let's start with Andrew. Who are you and what kind of work are you doing?
Yeah, so I'm a father, and I work as a psychiatrist in Toronto, providing care to children, adolescents, and families. And then I also have a particular area of interest and work around supporting new fathers and expectant fathers and fathers with young kids. You know, those fathers who may be experiencing mental health symptoms or may be at risk of developing a mental health condition. I've set up a program to provide support to them as well.
You know, it's not lost on me that you started off your introduction, your identity actually with being a father. Now, it comes to the front of my mind because a lot of conversations I've had with past guests have talked about their work being their identity and actually removing themselves from their work being the forefront of who they are and their characteristic. But I can imagine being a father as your identity and leading with that, that's a more comfortable place to be for most people who are fathers. So when did you start doing that? Was that a conscious decision or was that something that just naturally kind of just evolved?
Yeah, in terms of, kind of identifying that way, yeah, no, I think it's certainly evolved. I've, studied and been working, for a long time, which, came before having children. Even doing work in the area of father's mental health came before having kids. But they're obviously quite complementary. I learned a lot from both of my roles. And I think at the end of the day, recognizing the importance of family and being there for family, is it's gonna impact the work that I do and the choices and the decisions I make. But I want to be, as much as I enjoy and find a lot of privilege in caring for others, I want to make sure that I carry for those at home as well.
That's brilliant. Andrew, what got you in the line of the work that you're doing today? When did that all start for you?
Yeah, I mean, when I was a kid, I enjoyed the show ER, and that got me interested in medicine. And then when I was in medical school, I was curious and excited about all the different rotations and different areas of medicine. I come from rural Nova Scotia, and my relatives there wanted me to be a rural family doc. But I got interested in mental health, and I saw opportunities to improve the mental health of individuals in our community through a variety of ways, so but my family was still like, oh, do rural family medicine, and then I said, oh, maybe I was thinking about being a surgeon, and then they're like, no, no. And then when I said psychiatry, they're like, okay, you can be a surgeon, but you know what? At the end of the day, I made the right choice. It's been a really rewarding career. And then as I've gone along my training journey, became particularly interested in working with families and supporting kids and their parents. And then I saw an opportunity to really engage men in their mental health care for themselves and their family by looking down that lens of being a father and how that may be a source of motivation for them to participate in their child's care, but also to take a look in the mirror and reflect on themselves and their own well-being and how if they improve their mental health, that could go a long way in improving their family's health and certainly their child's development and their child's outcomes.
What stuck out for you? What was that point in which you realized that men's mental health, particularly fathers, was something you really wanted to dive into more? What was the epiphany?
Yeah, well, I can remember the cases, where I was looking after kids, and often it was their moms that were joining them for their appointments. And then a few of them, based on their description, it sounded like their dad was really home struggling. He may be able to work, but he sounded like he had a lot of difficulty at home as a partner and as a parent. And initially, I just really wanted to find a way to engage him to help him better understand his kid and what his kid was struggling with. And a few of those dads I wasn't able to connect with, and that gave me the beginning of kind of where's Waldo and the search for those dads that might struggle and how can we better improve their care. And then through that path, came to focus on the early phase, for fathers who are new fathers or fathers with young kids, focusing around supporting that and the perinatal population where women are receiving, extra mental health care during the postpartum period. But even so, in doing that work, made me start to realize some of the bigger factors that are affecting, boys and men these days, and some of the concerning data that we have around their mental health and death related to suicide, opioid use, and so forth. So, really, with the focus of wanting to care for kids and families has led me to this point of recognizing that we need to do some important and special things, for men in general.
Were you a father when you made that decision, or was this before you being a father?
Yeah, the idea of engaging and helping men happened before I became a dad, and then the real clinical work kind of happened in parallel about 12 years ago, around the time of my son's birth, and so it's sort of gone kind of in parallel and hand in hand, as I say, and one is certainly informed the other. I think becoming a parent has made me, I think, appreciate even more some of the challenges and issues that parents in general, may deal with in raising kids and managing, a variety of aspects of their life. So that's been humbling to have kids along the way.
What was that like, that experience for you, diving into it, being not being a father at that time, like, and compared to now, like, how did you feel you were, responding to that sort of work at that time, and how people were responding to you when you didn't have children?
Yeah, I mean, I think um, I hope that I approached it with a lot of curiosity, and a desire to, for the patients to experience empathy and to feel sort of understood by me for whatever they were going through. I think men recognized that there was very limited offerings out there for them during this early phase, where we see a lot of support for new moms, and rightfully so. But there was a real void in what was being offered to men. So I think they were happy to have the opportunity to be seen, and to have an opportunity to talk about their experiences, and to and to get some help.
You talked earlier about some patterns that you were seeing in the clinical work that you're doing with fathers' mental health. What are some of the prevailing patterns that you're noticing?
Yeah. I'd say initially a lot of the dads that got referred to me had a partner who was receiving mental health care. So they were at home with a partner who may have been struggling with postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety, and so they were dealing with that factor. And one, they were coming to me wanting to know how best they could support their partner and their child during these circumstances. And that may have been their primary motivation to come and see me in the first place. But then once, speaking with me and hearing more about their own history, came to identify some of the things that they could also explore, and work on individually. But we know that, postpartum depression is can happen for men, that men can experience a depressive episode, during the final stages of pregnancy and within that first year of their child's life. It's the most vulnerable time, I think, for men to experience depressive symptoms and anxiety. So we've been able to, identify and work with that. I'd say another pattern is that when kids come into our lives, the amount of stressors and issues go up, and the time that we have to utilize our coping skills, to find time for ourselves, to kind of recover and fill the tank diminishes. And so the simple math would say that, we're experiencing a lot more stress and a lot less opportunity to manage that stress. So I think recognizing that pattern is important, and then figuring out what are these few things that we could do that would be really meaningful and, fill that tank up a little bit. So those are some of the strategies that we would work on. But it's definitely a vulnerable time for the family and the relationship, and a vulnerable time for their mental health. And yeah, I would say that, more and more nowadays, men are coming because they become aware of the service, or their family doctor is aware of it, and not necessarily because their partner is struggling, but more they just want the help for themselves.
What does that struggle look like in real time? If you're to illustrate some of the examples of how mental health impacts a father during those critical times of being a new dad or about to be a new dad, etc., what are some of those behaviors or actions, and how are they manifesting in real time based on what you're seeing?
Yeah. Well, I'd say to the basics is that there's a lack of sleep, as you can imagine, an infant at home. So there's that. There's a lack of outlets kind of to deal with stress. Often there are things happening simultaneously in terms of, looking after the baby and the family, and also dealing with difficult or stressful times, at work. There's that psychological sort of transition or even disruption, from becoming a parent, and seeing yourself differently. Maybe grieving a little bit of the former self that had a bit more free time and flexibility and independence, and may have been involved in things, or may have had relationships with friends and activities that you did together that may be happening kind of less and less. So there may be a bit of grief with that. Sometimes there's a bit of overwhelming experience of thinking about your own childhood and what it was like for you as a kid with your parents, and maybe even your relationship, with your dad, what worked and what didn't work. And maybe some painful memories from that come up. And then, a bit of questioning, like, how am I going to be as a dad? Did I, in comparison to the dad or the role models, in my life, and if I had an absent father, how do I know if I'm doing it right, and doing it well? And so maybe a bit of impact on one's sort of self-confidence in being, in this role. And then my partner and I, we were partners, and now we may be in the role as co-parents as well. And what does that relationship look like? And if I want to connect as partners, and my partner wants to connect as co-parents, then I might feel like some of my needs, are not being met in the relationship, and I might find that stressful. And so all of these things can manifest in a variety of ways, in terms of, like, just emotionally feeling disconnected or alone or sad, or angry. Behaviorally, it could be a bit of avoidance. I don't want to, if I don't feel like I'm going to do a good job, maybe I'll stay at work where I feel like I could, ensure that I'm doing what's expected of me and what I'm capable of. And so, yeah, and then there may be some other maladaptive coping that happens as well. And so I'd say our focus is to, acknowledge those things that are happening and those stressors and those feelings, and, find healthy and alternative ways to talk about them and to manage them.
It's very interesting. I'm wondering, as you're talking about the psychology of becoming a father and the things that impact the way you perceive yourself during that process, and what you perceive you're going to be after that. I think about myself. Like I have a daughter, she's 11 years old, and I knew for myself growing up, my biological father wasn't there. He wasn't there the night I was born. He wasn't somebody who was like a constant in my life, so I never had that father figure. And then I ended up having a stepfather whom was a really great man in so many ways, being handy and the way he worked, etc. But we didn't have a relationship, and I was a very young man when I was around 5 years old when he came into our life. But we never got along for some reason. I don't know what that is, and we were never able to, diagnose why. But I never had that fatherly bond. And for myself, I know going into fatherhood for myself was more about looking at not being the examples that I've had in the past. I always said I wanted to make up that gap and I want to be better. And it's challenging sometimes because you have the intention, but you don't necessarily have the tools or the equipment because you've never experienced it firsthand yourself. So I found myself knowing that I had the right intentions of being a good father. And right now, my daughter is everything to me, and I want to make sure she feels loved, she feels cared for, and she's getting that support that she needs. And I know the time and the effort that I'm spending with her is definitely not what I got as a young man. So I know I'm doing something right in that context. But I think my initial worry becoming a father was that, oh my goodness, I don't have a blueprint. I know what I want, but I don't have a blueprint. What if I'm not that person? And how do I look at my daughter if she's upset at me or she's not giving me attention? How do I internalize that in a way that's neutral versus a way of, oh my goodness, I'm doing something wrong? So I found myself going through that transition as well, but I never really thought about it from a mental health perspective.
No, well, I mean, thanks for sharing that, and I've heard that scenario, for sure, and I've, in the fathers group that I've been involved in, it's so nice to see, men speaking to that to each other and reminding us that, being present, that asking these questions, reflecting on this, in terms of, whether or not I've done it right or I'm getting it right. How could I, explore, doing this, differently, and acknowledging, the mistakes that we make, and finding ways forward. So, I think that there's, so many common, and I think, and good things that kind of men reflect on, despite not having that clear blueprint, from their own experience. It's when um, it's when things, when that may be in addition to, depression or anxiety, that those thoughts can even become, bigger or even more catastrophic. So I think that experience isn't going to cause, depression or anxiety. But if you can imagine, being in a depressed state or an overly anxious state, that you could really get hung up on, some of these self-critical thoughts, and become more self-critical than self-reflective. So I think, yeah, I think those are, those the ways that the dads are thinking is important to be attuned to. And as you can imagine, it can be more intense, at different stages, if mental health condition is also playing a role.
What's interesting is that I think men in general are perceived differently in society in terms of how they are coping or handling stress. And it's
Mhm.
not okay. It's getting better, but it's not okay for men typically to show signs of stress or to talk about it or to emotionalize with it, etc. It's like you need to kind of suppress it, rationalize it, and move on because you need to do your thing. You need to be a provider. You need to be a man, so to speak. So somebody becoming a father, obviously that's going to compound the struggles as you're talking about and the expectations that they have in their family and in society at large. How pervasive is this, Andrew, when you think about how many men could be struggling with this? Like, is this something that is a rarity, or do you think there's a lot of men struggling with this that either aren't able to self-diagnose or understand it, or just not reporting it? Like, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, Dwayne, I think what's most pervasive in all of this um, is the loneliness that can be associated with these things. So, it's one thing to feel depressed or to even, have a depressive disorder. And then the next part is to be the only one aware that you're feeling that, and that you're struggling with that. And so, the loneliness is what I think is, is more pervasive, and that there are people that are having these sort of thoughts and feelings, and they're not sharing it with anyone, and nobody around them really appreciates or understands that that's what they're going through. And so I think things like therapy and so forth can help a person maybe change the way they think and feel, but it can certainly change, diminish the loneliness, which is a huge, I think, weight that people experience, and in particular men who are not talking about, what they're going through. We know that, maybe, 5 to 10% of the male population, is, going to experience, a depressive episode, and that can double during more stressful times, including, this perinatal period. And so we recognize that, yeah, that there are more men out there who are depressed that are actually, receiving, clinical care, or asking for help. And I think that especially in this phase of, becoming a father, and in those first, 5 years, with the lack of kind of clear resources and support, that men are managing this on their own, and probably experiencing some loneliness to it. What I don't want them to feel is also like invisible, invisible from us as healthcare providers. Whether you're the pediatrician looking after their kid, or the family doctor. So I think there's a role that we can see men, and inquire about how they're doing. But I agree. I think there's also work to be done in terms of helping men to like naturally find those connections, those groups, the fraternity that's so important in men's lives, and can be at a real loss, especially in the early parenthood stage.
Use the term perinatal. What is that?
Yeah, perinatal refers to like the 9 months of pregnancy, and the first year of a child's life. So that's kind of encompasses that whole kind of period, as opposed to pre or postnatal. Sort of the term perinatal has become more commonly used.
And what would a man want to recognize about that period?
Yeah, well, it's it's certainly a an important time to think about your relationship with your partner, as beyond just having that kind of partnership, but becoming co-parents and really becoming a team, and thinking how can we work together as a team as we move forward. I think it's important to really appreciate and be aware of just how much their partner, if it's a female partner who's pregnant, is sort of is transforming physically and emotionally during that period, and they carry even greater risk of having mental health issues. So being aware of that is important. I think it takes some time for men to like realize like that a baby is coming, and for some, it might not be until they hear them cry, at the delivery. And so, but whatever can be done in terms of like, preparing for that realization, not just on like on how to look after an infant, but like I said, how we're going to work together as a team. What are we going to, kind of focus on? What are the changes that we agree we're going to make as a family so that we can focus our time and energy, looking after this baby, and maybe step away from the supports and all the other things that we may be doing, outside of that sort of nuclear family. So I think I think it's reflecting that there's going to be a change in the relationship, that your partner's going to go through some fundamental changes, and that you will, as well. And sometimes it takes having the baby in your arms to sort of to wake up to that. But I think it's good to think and prepare for that as much as possible.
Have you found that a father's age at the point at which they have their first child, do you find any significant differences in the age in which they have their child in correlation to mental health symptoms or issues or challenges that they have?
I would say that younger fathers, younger mothers are a bit more vulnerable of experiencing stress and mental health symptoms um, than fathers in their 30s or later. So I think like the young age would be a risk factor for developing that. Perhaps in a situation of just having less resources, less kind of less supports, awareness, and perhaps maturity in terms of dealing with that. There isn't a lot more to say in terms of whether older fathers having their first child are particularly higher risk. So age is not, I would say, a huge factor in the puzzle.
When preparing for our conversation, I was doing some research online and I stumbled across a Chris Rock video, and it was just a clip of him talking at one of his shows. And it really stuck out. And I'm like, how in the world did I land on this today? But it was perfect. And I'm going to paraphrase it. Hopefully, I don't butcher it. But he says, there's a kind of coldness that you have to accept when you're a man. And he goes on to say, only women, children, and dogs are loved unconditionally. Men are only loved under the condition that they provide. And, I heard that and I'm like, the minute I heard that, I was like, I wonder what Andrew thinks about that, because I hear from that something that probably comes from a lot of truth in terms of the pressures that men have to provide. Like, what are your thoughts on that? Like, is there any validity to what he said?
Yeah, I have been thinking more about masculinity, and what that means this day and age. I think there's lots of talk of it, lots of terms around traditional, progressive, toxic, and so forth. And I think that our definition of masculinity will come from the men in our lives, as kids. And I look back at pictures of my late father, and I see him in so many different roles, and as quite different as my brother and I were as kids, and even now in our interests and activities, I can see direct lines to our father and the kind of the hats he wore and the things that he enjoyed doing. And so I think that in that traditional of protect and provide, as we see kind of traditional attributes of masculinity, it's not that they're necessarily bad, but I think that to protect and provide these day and ages means something different, than it did, back then. And I think there's also more that we want to do. And I think the key thing about masculinity these days is being adaptable and having different wearing different hats, seeing ourselves in different roles, and playing out those roles when it matters. But there's no question that even dads today who are really hands-on in the care of their newborn and their kids are still thinking about their role as providers. And in the sense of like how much are they going to earn for their family and provide for their family, through their employment. Just feeling that pressure from themselves. Maybe hearing a bit about it, within their kind of extended family, and assuming that their own parents or their in-laws may have some of those expectations of them as well. So it's definitely something that remains on the minds of men who do a lot more than just see themselves as providing, an income, for the family. But I do think that that men are much more than that. And I think our kids see a lot of value in dads being present and curious, and so I don't think it's as conditional as it may have been considered.
It's As you're talking, it got me thinking about, obviously the monetary component of fatherhood and being a provider from a financial perspective. And I started to think about this, Andrew, and I'm like, so you talked earlier about some of the manifestations of being a father and maybe not coping the best and having some mental health, underlying mental health issues or challenges, etc. And I'm wondering how much of it is connected to maybe the financial responsibility that they may not have uprooted and really kind of looked at clearly. And maybe that's manifesting in these other aspects of like not sleeping, as you mentioned earlier. Is it a presence thing? And when I think about presence as a man, are you prepared to take care of this child? And then on top of that, leaving a past life of hobbies and activities. But then I'm also thinking that emotional presence, is there a natural instinct for fathers to be emotionally present, and what does that look like? So when I think about the physical presence, the emotional presence, and then obviously the financial provisions, do, is it like a combination of all of them for most fathers? Is it just one avenue that impacts certain fathers more than others? Like, I'm just trying to understand a little bit about where the core of maybe some of these health issues stem from.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the greatest gifts that we can give our kids is to help them, be able to understand and manage their emotions, in an effective way. And I think that you could people who struggle with maybe depression and anxiety, certainly not all of them, but some of them may have a difficult time, being fully in touch with and kind of aware of and know how to manage their own emotions. And so but I think for dads and for men who can help their kids emotionally, pays huge dividends to their kids, development. As individuals, in the context of relationships, their sense of self and their kind of success, in the world. And even emotions like anger, I mean that's one of my favorite emotions. I mean it's a super important emotion to have. It helps us realize that something's not working, that something's not feeling good, and that we have to kind of move away from this scenario or situation because of how bad it's making me feel. The problem with anger is like how we express and deal with that emotion. That's really important, because that can be the emotion that can become most problematic in the context of relationships, whether it's with your partner, your kids, or at work or in society. And so I think that for those dads that are aware that they have a real gift to offer their kids through helping them regulate emotions, it's critical. But it does mean that we're probably going to have to do a little bit of work ourselves to be in touch with how we manage our own feelings. And so, but it's really like it's not easy. I mean, I will talk about this with dads, and then find myself feeling angry at home, and having a difficulty tolerating that feeling. But the times where I've been like, sitting with my kids and maybe my voice is raising and I stop and think, what, kids, I'm feeling really angry right now, and like it can be a bit settling, a bit grounding to sort of name that feeling, and maybe it's like, I'm feeling this way. So maybe we need to take a break, from what we're doing. Or, maybe you're feeling angry too, and here we are both feeling, really, really angry. And it's making us, really, really unhappy, in the moment. And so, yeah, I appreciate it's not easy. But yeah, being there, emotionally is critical. And I think that, I think, men being in touch with their emotions, and feeling equipped to deal with them, is a really, uh, really kind of important piece, to the health of ourselves and, the health of relationships, with partners, and with kids. So I think, yeah, I think there's some steps along the way, but I think we have an opportunity to really support our kids, and for them to, especially the boys in our lives, to kind of see us dads, model our emotions in an effective way in terms of how we express them towards our partners, and how we, express them at home towards the kids. It's gonna make a big difference in what and how they go on to to manage those intense feelings later in life.
I'm going to provide some combinations for you because I want to get your thoughts on this. So,
Yeah.
I'm a father. I have a daughter. Is there anything that I need to do differently with a daughter than I would need to do if I had a son?
Yeah. I think that my gut response is no. I think that although I think we tend to feel that way. I think parents, probably do parent their sons and daughters a bit differently, may have sort of different expectations of them. I think, especially like emotionally, like, maybe we say boys don't cry. It's okay if our daughters cry. Then you could see how we would respond differently, if a child was crying based on their gender. I mean, I think dad's relationships with their daughters is critical, especially, for their daughter in terms of their development of their self-esteem, um, and their level of engagement, in different kinds of behaviors, as a teenager. And so I think men make the mistake that when their daughter's a teenager and maybe going through, having their period, that now it's, their mom's job to sort of support them in this phase. But actually, it's a really important time for daughters to feel, connected with their dads, and that their dads are aware of what's going on, because that relationship, that connection, protects them in the decisions they make around, relationships, and kind of risk-taking behaviors, in later adolescence. So I think feeling, connected, is important for all kids. And I think there's it's more similar, I think, than different than the approach that, we would have as dads, in terms of trying to understand and connect how our kids are feeling, what they're dealing with, and that kind of thing.
The other combination I had was single fathers. So,
Hmm.
what unique experiences and support do single fathers need?
Yeah. I mean, I think single parents in general, benefit from, having a community, of other adults, who are involved in their kids' lives, who love their kid, who want to be there to support them and to protect them, and have kind of a role modeling or mentoring role in different ways. And then I think, specifically for single dads, and certainly those that I have encountered, have really, stepped up to address, all the different factors, that come their way. And I think, for those that can, build a bit of a community of support, for themselves, but maybe if that supports even, circles around the child as well, is great. Whether it's, extended family, or friends, or neighbors. So I think that's really important. Um, yeah, um, dads have really, um, taken seriously the health and development of their kids, and played a primary role in ensuring that they, go to their medical appointments. And the dads that have, struggled, with their own depression, anxiety, or ADHD, in one hand, they would be nervous, and maybe even feel some guilt or even shame if their child was to experience some of those things. But now the conversation is more like, if it happens, I have an understanding of where they're coming from, and I also know how they can get help. So I think it's like seeing, what may have been an issue for them, that if it presents with their kid, it may be an opportunity to connect with them, and I know how to get you help. So I think those are some really strong and powerful messages that come when men experience, support in a caring healthcare system.
Yeah, it takes a village, right? Um, you
Yeah.
said earlier that I kept a bookmark on this, that you're talking about your earlier evolution in the clinical work that you're doing, and you were working a lot with families. and it went from like kids to families, and then you kind of honed in on fathers. So it sounds to me that you realize that fathers have a huge impact on the work that you were doing with the families, and you discovered an opportunity there, almost like going to the source. How did you identify that?
Yeah. Um, I think it was in part, hearing, uh, hearing, kids talk about their relationship with their dad, and recognizing that there may be some strain or difficulty there for a variety of reasons. I think perhaps I was also, even before I became a dad, and my work with kids, like, feeling, bad for these dads who may not have had an opportunity to, understand and connect with their kids, and were missing out on an opportunity to really, to fulfill, I'm sure, what they want, which is their kid to have the best chance, their kid to be their healthiest selves and that kind of thing. And here they were not realizing that they could play a bigger role in that if they just sort of, had some information, had a bit of guidance and a bit of support. So really kind of feeling for them. And then just seeing this pattern that, we were not sort of asking, what does the dad think about the situation? And how could he play a bigger role? So those sort of questions kind of kept growing, and that sort of led to really thinking about, like, we've got to do something different here, to engage men.
How have you been able to, and I'm not sure if this is something you've thought about specifically, but how have you been able to engage fathers in a way that they understand that their mental health was an act of self-leadership within their family?
Yeah, yeah, no, no, great question. Yeah, I think it's in part, sort of pulling out, their story, and listening to, how their story, has unfolded, and the impact that any, difficult, moments or traumatic moments, may have had on their own sort of life and development. Um, I think, pulling out their strengths, and what they are doing and what they feel good about, their role and involvement, within their family. And then, looking at ways to connect those two things, and to kind of, build on that, and to help them realize that they can, feel more, more competent and confident, by approaching things a little differently, by, addressing, some of their mental health piece, by, engaging with their partner differently, and then, following up, and over time, seeing these discussions and these interventions, work for them. And so I think that process is helped to do that. But I do say that, coming and getting help, it's not, medication or therapy is not a crutch. It actually empowers people, to feel more in control moving forward, of leading their lives, helping their family, and finding their success. And so yeah, I would say it empowers them rather than is a crutch that holds them back and feels like somebody else is kind of doing the work, for them.
And what are some of the natural consequences if they don't do the work? Let's say somebody listens to this and kind of puts it at the wayside.
Yeah, well, I think they are, missing out, on what might be one of the greatest gifts of having a kid, which is an opportunity to maybe repair, and work through some of our past, relationship traumas or difficulties or that kind of thing. That you can experience childhood and play and relationships, and parent yourself, and as you parent your kid. And so I think there's a real opportunity here. And so not paying attention to that is kind of a missed opportunity for some self growth. And I think that, ongoing kind of like, a strain or a disconnect, from our kids can be harder and harder to repair or to kind of work through as they get older. And so it may experience more, kind of more frustration and dissatisfaction with how things are going. And so that can be difficult, demoralizing, and if there's a vulnerability to experiencing, depressive episodes or debilitating anxiety, some of these unhealthy relationships can be, stressors that can be a catalyst for, experiencing some of that again, in the future.
What's one piece of advice you would give to a man who is entering just in the beginning of the perinatal stage when he finds out he's going to be a father?
Yeah, I would say take advantage of the time that you have. Uh, you know, in terms of and think about I think just in terms of like self-care, think about the time, think about the root, your routine. Time is a bit more to yourself is a bit more precious. So think about, how you want to use that time. Because it'll diminish, once the baby comes, which is okay. Obviously, I want to say, think about you and your partner as teammates, and either come up with some projects, that you can work on together, or think about how you'll master the biggest project of your life, several months sort of down the road. But I would challenge, couples to think about themselves as a team, and see what that's like to do some small tasks or projects, and where is some of the strain, with that. The thing is that when kids come along, all of those things that we may have ignored talking about, like the relationship with our in-laws, or how we're spending our money, or what we really kind of value. Those things can no longer be ignored, when we have kids. So there's some really important conversations that come, and they usually come under the stress of not sleeping and a crying baby, and they're much more difficult to resolve. So, if you could have, some of those important conversations beforehand, I would say that would be my other tip.
Um, well, this is the part of the conversation where I turn it to the guest once more to read that letter to their former self before they became the person that they are today.
All right, here's my letter to my former self. You did good, kid. You followed your heart. You leaned into your strengths. Your curiosity, empathy, and desire to do something different paid off. You made it. You have a wonderful family, a meaningful career, and you've come to realize your values. You experienced some hardship, and you worked hard. Yes, you held the door open for others, but you probably didn't realize how many doors were held open for you. While you grew up in a family that valued fairness, it would take a while for you to appreciate the true meaning of equity, and that everyone deserves a fair chance, each with their foot on the same starting line. As a white, cisgender, straight male from a middle-class background, you have benefited from structural advantages from positive assumptions and biases about you. Your gratitude and appreciation for your past opportunities is well intended, but may have overlooked this advantage. Knowing this now, what would you have done in order to stand in line with others along the way?
That's incredible. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for taking the time to put that together. Before we wrap up, is there anything that we didn't talk about today that you wanted to touch on?
Yeah, I think that letter to myself, I think speaks to, wanting just to improve, access to care for people, and recognizing that there are people out there who have to work really hard to get to the point at which, care is being provided. And I think it's upon us as healthcare professionals to recognize that, and to put in that effort to kind of match the effort that people in the community have to make it there. And so I'm always, recognizing patients that it's not easy to come to, to a doctor's office or a therapist's appointment and that kind of thing. And so there's a lot that happens for a patient to do that. And so I recognize that, and I recognize that men out there may have many barriers between kind of where they're at and where they'd like to be, or the help that they want to get. And so I do hope that we continue to find ways to acknowledge and sort of knock those barriers down. And I think opportunities like conversations like this with you, Dwayne, is a great way of doing that, of normalizing that help is okay, that help empowers, men, and it pays off in terms of how we live our lives, and certainly in the health and development of our kids. And I know that fathers really want the best for their kids, and sometimes that means getting the best for us, and including the best healthcare. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be here with you and to have this conversation.
Yeah. And I appreciate you being here too, and the work that you're doing. I could tell it's coming from a very passionate place. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.